On the night of my retirement party, my only son Ethan stood up in front of everyone and said, "You're a failure, Dad. Don't expect anything from me." The entire room laughed. People I had worked with for decades turned their eyes on me with pity and amusement. My wife Margaret held my hand under the table, trying to protect me from the shame. What none of them knew was that I owned 40% of the company's shares. They thought they were laughing at me, but they were about to learn who really held the power. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. My name is Henry Lawson. I am 67 years old, and after 40 years of service, I was finally saying goodbye to the company that had been my second home. The retirement party was meant to be a celebration of my hard work, my loyalty, and the sacrifices I made along the way. The hall was decorated with banners, soft music played in the background, and my colleagues came up to shake my hand, smiling and congratulating me. Margaret, my wife of 45 years, sat beside me, her eyes full of pride. She whispered, "Henry, tonight is your night. You gave this company everything. Let yourself enjoy this." I smiled, but deep inside I felt a heavy ache. I had given so much of my life to this place that I sometimes wondered if I had failed as a father. My son Ethan never forgave me for missing baseball games and birthdays because I was stuck at the office. He grew up resenting me, believing that I worked my life away for nothing. I had hoped tonight might bring us closer, that he might finally understand what all those sacrifices were for. The guests laughed and shared stories, raising glasses in my honor. For a moment, I felt peace. My colleagues praised me, saying things like, "No one worked harder than Henry," and "We wouldn't be here today without him." My daughter-in-law Clara smiled politely, though I could see the impatience in her eyes. She always believed Ethan deserved more, and she made sure to remind him of it. As I sat there, I thought about the years I had poured into this place. I thought about the late nights, the missed vacations, the countless times Margaret stayed up waiting for me to come home. I had built a life of quiet sacrifice, not for wealth or glory, but for stability and dignity. I believed my son would one day see that. But as the evening went on, a storm was about to break. The party that began as a celebration would soon turn into a test of my strength, my silence, and the truth I had kept hidden for so many years. The evening was moving along, and I felt the weight slowly lifting from my shoulders. After 40 years, I was finally done. Colleagues came forward with their speeches, each one thanking me for my dedication, for staying with the company when others moved on, and for never giving up even when the business went through hard times. I listened quietly, a faint smile on my face. For once, I allowed myself to feel proud. Then, it happened. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor cut through the soft music. My son, Ethan, stood up. His face was sharp, his expression cold. Clara leaned back in her chair, smirking, as if she knew what was coming. The room grew quiet, all eyes turning to him. At first, I thought he might say something kind, maybe a simple, "Congratulations, Dad." My heart held on to that hope for a split second, but the words that came out of his mouth shattered it instantly. "Everyone keeps saying my dad worked hard," Ethan began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But let's be honest. He wasted his life here. He worked himself into the ground. And for what? He never built his own business, never gave us the life we deserved. He's a failure. That's the truth. Don't expect anything from me, Dad." The words hit me harder than any punch. For a moment, the hall was silent. Then a ripple of laughter spread across the crowd. Some tried to hide their smiles, but others didn't bother. People I had known for decades, people I had helped train, were laughing at me, at my life, at everything I had sacrificed. Margaret gasped softly beside me and clutched my hand under the table. I could feel her fingers trembling. "Ethan, stop this," she whispered. But he didn't care. He had the attention of the entire room, and he wasn't finished. He raised his glass and sneered. "This company is all he ever had, and now even that's gone. He gave everything and got nothing in return. Do you want to know the truth? I'll never live like him. I'll never waste my life in some office just to be forgotten." The room erupted again, some laughing, some whispering to each other. I sat frozen, my throat tight, my chest burning with shame. I could barely breathe. My colleagues avoided my eyes, their faces full of amusement or pity. My son had humiliated me in front of everyone. Inside, my heart cracked. I thought of the nights I had missed his school plays because I was finishing a project, the weekends I had spent at the office instead of taking him fishing, the birthdays I had missed because I was traveling for work. I had always told myself it was for him, for his future, and now here he was, standing tall, mocking me in front of the very people I had worked so hard to support. Clara leaned close to him, whispering something that made him laugh. I knew she had always pushed him to see me as a failure, telling him I hadn't given enough. In that moment, her satisfied smile cut deeper than his words. She enjoyed seeing me broken, seeing her husband stand above me. Margaret's voice shook as she whispered again, "Henry, say something. Defend yourself." But I couldn't. My pride wouldn't let me beg for respect in front of people who had already decided to laugh at me. Instead, I sat there silently, gripping her hand tightly, my jaw locked. What none of them knew was the truth I carried inside. For years, I had been quietly buying shares in the company. Every bonus, every extra paycheck, every bit of savings went into it. I never told Ethan because I wanted him to build his own path, not wait for me to hand him wealth. I never told Clara because I knew her hunger for money, and I never bragged about it to my colleagues because I wasn't looking for their approval. I held my silence as Ethan continued. "Look at him. He's sitting there, letting me say all this, because he knows it's true. He knows he wasted his life. He's nothing but an old man who gave too much and got too little." My chest burned with anger, but I refused to break. I let him speak. I let the crowd laugh, because I knew something he didn't. I knew that before the night ended, the truth would come out, and every word he spoke would come back to him like a curse. The laughter echoed in my ears, and for a moment I felt small, like a man stripped of dignity. But inside, a storm was building. I wasn't going to fight him with words. I was going to let the truth reveal itself, and when it did, the same people who laughed would never laugh at me again. As the laughter faded into whispers, the master of ceremonies stepped back onto the stage, preparing to invite the CEO, Mr. Raymond Blake, to give his remarks. Raymond had been the face of the company for years, a man I had worked alongside through highs and lows. He respected me, though even he did not know the full extent of my involvement behind the scenes. Ethan dropped back into his chair with a satisfied smirk, his arm casually draped around Clara. She leaned in and whispered something into his ear that made him chuckle. He looked at me as if I were defeated, as if he had won some final battle. In his eyes, I was just a tired old man whose time had passed. I remained silent, my face calm, though my heart pounded like a drum inside my chest. Margaret leaned toward me. "Henry, you can't let him do this to you. Say something." Her voice was pleading, but also protective. She wanted me to defend myself. She wanted me to tell Ethan, and everyone else in the room, that his cruel words were not the truth, but I shook my head slightly. "Not yet," I whispered. It wasn't fear holding me back. It was choice. I had spent my life learning when to speak and when to wait, and this moment called for patience. Words could only do so much, and I had no intention of fighting Ethan's insults with more words. I had something far stronger. Raymond Blake walked onto the stage, the crowd clapping politely. He adjusted his glasses, holding a sheet of paper in his hands. He began by praising my decades of dedication, sharing stories of how I had stayed late when projects nearly collapsed, how I had trained new generations of workers, and how I had never once abandoned the company during its darkest hours. As he spoke, I saw Ethan roll his eyes. Clara shifted in her chair, bored and unimpressed. She leaned forward slightly and whispered, "This is dragging. Why waste so much praise on him?" Ethan smirked, whispering back, "Because they don't know the truth. He gave everything and got nothing. I'll never end up like him." I heard their words, though they thought I couldn't. Each insult was like a knife, but I refused to flinch. I kept my focus on Raymond, because I knew what was coming. After a few more minutes of stories and thanks, Raymond's tone shifted. He placed his notes aside and looked out at the crowd. "There's something many of you may not know," he said firmly. The room grew quiet. Henry Lawson's contribution to this company goes far beyond his years of service. His belief in this business was not just professional, it was deeply personal. I saw Ethan tilt his head, confused. Clara frowned, whispering, "What does he mean?" Raymond continued, "Over the years, while others invested in themselves, Henry invested in us. He believed in the future of this company, so much that he quietly bought shares whenever he could. Tonight, I want to acknowledge the man who not only gave us his time, but also became our second largest shareholder. Henry Lawson owns 40% of this company." The words landed like thunder. A wave of shock rolled through the room. Gasps filled the air. People turned in their seats to look at me, their eyes wide, their faces stunned. The same colleagues who had laughed moments earlier now stared at me with a mix of disbelief and awe. Ethan's smirk vanished instantly. His jaw dropped, his face pale. Clara's eyes widened, her hand slipping from his arm. For the first time all night, they were speechless. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of pride. She squeezed my hand tightly, whispering, "You did it, Henry. They finally see who you really are." I kept my face calm, though inside, relief washed over me. I had waited for this moment, endured the humiliation, because I knew the truth would speak louder than anything I could have said. This was the turning point. No more whispers about failure, no more laughter at my expense. The silence in the room said it all. Ethan looked at me, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. His arrogance had collapsed under the weight of reality. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The confidence they carried minutes before had crumbled. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to stand and shout. The truth had done it for me. My decision to stay silent, to let the announcement come naturally, had turned the tide completely. The same people who once laughed were now clapping again, but this time with genuine respect. Raymond raised his glass. To Henry Lawson, a man of loyalty, faith, and quiet strength. The hall erupted into applause, the sound echoing like a victory song, and as I looked at Ethan, I knew that no insult, no cruel word would ever undo this moment. He had tried to strip me of dignity, but instead he had revealed his own smallness. This was the turning point. From here, nothing would ever be the same again. The room fell into stunned silence. Raymond's words seemed to hang in the air, echoing against the walls. 40%. The number was more powerful than any speech I could have given, more cutting than any insult Ethan had thrown my way. In that instant, the room that had once mocked me was transformed. Faces that had been smiling at my son's cruel jokes were now staring at me in disbelief. Some guests actually dropped their glasses, the sound of shattering echoing through the hall. Others leaned toward each other, whispering rapidly, as if they couldn't trust their own ears. I could feel the eyes of every person fixed on me, not with laughter, not with pity, but with respect, and for some, shame. Ethan's face was pale, his mouth opened, then closed again, like a man drowning without air. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't have the words to dominate a room. Clara's hand slipped from his arm. Her eyes darted nervously from me to the CEO, then back to Ethan. The confident smirk she wore earlier was gone, replaced by a tight line of shock. Raymond continued, his voice firm and proud. Without Henry's faith in this company, many of our greatest expansions would not have been possible. His investment wasn't for recognition. It wasn't for applause. It was because he believed in what we built together. Henry is not only a part of this company's past, he is a cornerstone of its future. The crowd erupted in applause. Real applause this time. No forced clapping, no polite acknowledgement. This was genuine. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some even whistled, shouting my name. The very same people who had laughed at me minutes earlier now looked at me as if I were a giant standing among them. Margaret turned to me, tears running down her cheeks. She squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. "I told you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They see you now." I stood slowly, my legs steady despite the weight of the moment. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had mocked me earlier. None of them could hold my gaze. They looked down at their shoes, ashamed of their laughter. Finally, I turned my eyes to Ethan, my son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed so much for, the boy who had just humiliated me in front of everyone. He sat frozen, his face burning red, his jaw clenched. His arrogance was gone. In its place was a hollow expression, as if the ground beneath him had been ripped away. I spoke calmly, my voice clear enough for the entire room to hear. You called me a failure, Ethan. You mocked me for giving my life to this company. But you see, success isn't about quick riches or loud words. It's about building something that lasts, something bigger than yourself. You saw weakness, but everyone here now knows the truth. My life wasn't wasted. It was invested. Gasps rippled through the room again, this time directed at Ethan. I could see people whispering, shaking their heads at him. The same people who had laughed along with him now looked at him with disgust. Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her cheeks flushed bright red. She tried to whisper something into Ethan's ear, but he brushed her away, his hands trembling. I continued, my voice steady, unshaken. You say you'll never live like me, and perhaps you won't. But I hope one day, when the applause is gone, when the friends who laugh at your cruelty disappear, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that respect is earned by sacrifice and by faith, not by tearing others down. The crowd clapped again, louder this time, drowning out any chance for Ethan to respond. I saw colleagues approach the stage, their eyes shining with admiration. Henry, we had no idea, one said. Another shook my hand firmly. You're an inspiration. Meanwhile, Ethan sat crumbling in his chair. The confidence he had worn like armor was gone. Clara avoided my eyes entirely, her shoulders slumping. The tables had turned in the most public, undeniable way. For years I had carried the burden of silence, investing quietly, never boasting, never demanding recognition. Tonight, that silence roared louder than any words could. Tonight, my dignity was restored. The applause stretched on, and I stood there, letting the sound wash over me. Not because I craved it, but because I knew I had earned it. My sacrifices, my late nights, my missed moments with family, they had not been wasted. They had built something enduring, something my son, in all his arrogance, had failed to see until it was too late. I looked back at Margaret, who smiled through her tears, her pride shining brighter than the lights in the hall. In that moment, I wasn't just a retiree. I wasn't just a husband. I was a man who had proven, beyond doubt, that a life of steady faith and hard work had value. And as Ethan sat in silence, crushed by the weight of his own words, I realized the irony. He had wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. Instead, he had humiliated himself. That was the climax. That was the moment everything changed. The laughter that once cut me down was gone. In its place was respect, pride, and a lesson that my son would never forget. The applause slowly faded, but the change in the room remained. People who had once looked at me with amusement now approached me with respect. They shook my hand, patted me on the back, and told me I had inspired them. Some apologized quietly, admitting they had laughed when Ethan mocked me, ashamed now of how quickly they had joined in. I accepted their words with a calm nod. I didn't need apologies. Their change in attitude was apology enough. Margaret stayed close by my side, her hand still gripping mine. She looked at me with pride in her eyes, the same pride she had carried through all the years when no one else understood why I worked so hard. Henry, she said softly, you showed them. You showed him. You showed everyone. I smiled at her, but my heart was heavy. I had not wanted victory over my son. I had wanted reconciliation. I had hoped that after all these years of resentment, Ethan would finally see me as more than just the father who was never there. But the truth was harsh. Sometimes even when the truth is revealed, it doesn't heal the wound. Sometimes it only exposes how deep the cut really is. As the guests surrounded me, Ethan and Clara slipped out of their seats. They moved quickly toward the door, their faces stiff and pale. People watched them leave, shaking their heads, whispering behind their hands. Ethan, who had tried to humiliate me, now walked away, humiliated himself. Clara clutched her purse tightly, her usual arrogance gone. Part of me wanted to call out to him. Part of me wanted to say, "Ethan, sit down. Let's talk. Let's fix this." But I didn't. I knew he wasn't ready to listen. Pride is a wall thicker than stone, and his pride had been wounded in front of everyone. He would need time, maybe years, to let the lesson sink in. For now, silence was the only answer. After the crowd settled, the CEO raised his glass once more. "To Henry Lawson," he said firmly, "a man who reminds us all that true success is not loud. It is steady, it is patient, and it lasts." The hall filled with cheers again, but this time I didn't feel like celebrating. I simply stood, lifted my glass, and said, "To the future." Later that night, when the hall emptied and Margaret and I walked to our car, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "I hope Ethan realizes one day what he did," she whispered. I placed my hand gently over hers. "He will," I said. "Life has a way of teaching lessons when words cannot." The drive home was quiet, but my mind was alive with thoughts. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the nights I spent working while my son went to bed without me. I thought about the birthdays I missed, the memories I didn't make. Those were scars that no amount of money or respect could erase. But I also thought about the bigger picture. I had provided stability. I had ensured a future not just for myself, but for Margaret, and, whether he admitted it or not, for Ethan too. That was the real lesson. Success is not measured by loud victories, by instant wealth, or by applause. Success is built brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, in the quiet choices no one else sees. I had chosen to endure, to invest, to keep faith when others gave up. That faith had carried me to this moment, where the truth could no longer be denied. To those who laughed, I showed that respect cannot be stolen by mockery. To my son, I showed that silence can hold more strength than any argument. And to myself, I proved that my life had meaning, not because of recognition, but because of perseverance. As I sat in my living room that night, Margaret beside me, I whispered a silent prayer. I prayed that one day Ethan would understand, that one day he would realize I hadn't lived for nothing, that one day he would see that a father's sacrifices are not failures, but foundations. Because in the end, this story was not about humiliation or revenge. It was about truth. The truth that hard work matters, the truth that loyalty counts, and the truth that sometimes the people who laugh at you will one day fall silent when the reality is revealed. I may not have won my son's respect that night, but I earned something else. I earned the respect of everyone who once doubted me, and more importantly, I earned peace with myself. That peace was worth more than any applause. So, to anyone listening, remember this. Success is not always loud. It is not always flashy. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and unseen, until the day it can no longer be ignored. That was the night they laughed at me, but it was also the night they would never forget my name. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. I love seeing this community grow across the world.